Have you ever experienced one of those coincidences so perfect that they seemed like a script written by destiny? That moment when you think of someone, and seconds later, that person calls you? Or when a doubt consumes you, and the answer appears in a book, a conversation, or on a billboard? This is not chance, it is synchronicity. In this profound video, we delve into one of Carl Jung's most fascinating concepts, synchronicity, the principle of a causal connection that unites our psyche with the fabric of the universe. We will explore how your inner world, your thoughts, fears, and desires is mirrored in external events, creating bridges of meaning where logic sees nothing but luck. Discover the difference between a coincidence and a clear signal from your collective unconscious. Learn to identify the archetypes at play in your life, and to use synchronicity as a compass to find your true path and give new meaning to life. This is not a journey into vague esotericism, but into analytical psychology and the hidden power of your mind. If you feel that the universe is trying to tell you something, this video is the key to start listening. Prepare yourself for a true spiritual awakening and to understand the secret language of your soul. We inhabit a world governed by logic, an invisible architecture of cause and effect that teaches us, from the cradle, that for every action, there is a predictable reaction. The stone falls because the hand let it go. The thunder sounds because lightning split the sky. This certainty gives us ground to stand on, a sense of order amidst a vast and, at times, frightening cosmos. However, there are moments, fissures, instants when this chain of causality breaks, and something inexplicable stares back at us. With an ancient and intelligent gaze, these are the moments we label, almost as a defensive reflex, as mere coincidences. But what, in fact, is a mere coincidence? It is the day when, tormented by a debt, you find on the ground the exact amount you needed. It is thinking with overwhelming longing of a childhood friend, lost for 2 decades, only to meet them in a coffee line in a city that neither of you calls home. It is the vivid dream of a golden scarab that precedes the appearance of an almost identical beetle, tapping at your office window. These events disturb us. They fascinate and frighten us in equal measure, as they suggest that the ground beneath our feet may not be as solid as we thought. The rational mind, trained to dissect and categorize, short circuits. It seeks refuge in the laws of probability, in statistical calculations, in confirmation bias. It's just the law of large numbers, whispers the voice of reason. If you toss a coin 1,000,000 times, at some point it will land on its edge. With billions of people living billions of seconds, improbable events are, in fact, inevitable. And with this cold but comforting explanation, the door to mystery is closed, and order is restored. But the soul is not satisfied with statistics. The experience of a meaningful coincidence is not mathematical. It is numinous, charged with a feeling of awe and wonder that probability cannot explain. It is the visceral sense that the event was not just improbable, but significant. It seemed orchestrated, choreographed by an invisible hand, an event that spoke directly to you, in a language that transcends words. It is here that the silent question our modern culture fears to ask resides. What if the universe is not a blind mechanism, but a living organism? What if reality is not a series of disconnected events, but a tapestry woven with threads of meaning? To deny this possibility is to cling to a predictable but soulless world. It is to choose a safe but magicless existence. To accept it is to take the first step on a much older and deeper path, a journey into oneself, where one discovers that the map of our inner world is, in some mysterious way, imprinted on the very fabric of the cosmos. The question, therefore, is not whether coincidences exist, but whether we have the courage to listen to what they are trying to tell us. To understand synchronicity, we must first unlearn what we think we know about reality. Carl Jung, a fearless explorer of the psyche's depths, proposed that causality, the pillar of all our Western science, is only one of the principles that order the universe. There's another, just as fundamental, yet far more subtle, and a causal connecting principle. This is not just an elegant way of saying coincidence. It is the description of a fundamental law of nature that operates outside of time and space, as we know them. Synchronicity, in its essence, is the union of 2 realms we believe to be separate, the inner world of the psyche thoughts, emotions, dreams, archetypes, and the outer world of objective events. A synchronistic event occurs when a significant inner, psychic state coincides with one or more external events that appear to be a parable or a mirror of that inner state, without any discernible causal connection between them. Imagine the psyche and matter as two clocks, built by the same watchmaker, in perfect sync, but without being physically connected. They show the same time not because one causes the other, but because both are tuned to a fundamental, invisible rhythm. This was Jung's great insight, developed in dialogues with the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, one of the fathers of quantum mechanics. They speculated about the existence of an unused mundus, a one world, the primordial, unified reality from which both psyche and matter emerge. At this fundamental level, the separation between mind and world does not exist. They are two faces of the same coin. Synchronicity, then, would be a momentary glimpse into this unified reality, a crack in the veil of our dualistic perception that allows us to see, for an instant, the underlying web that connects all things. It is not that your thought about your mother caused your phone call. It is that at the moment the archetypal image of the mother was activated in your psyche with great energy. That same energy manifested in the objective world through the corresponding event. The inner event and the outer event are simultaneous manifestations of a single archetypal pattern emerging from the unused mundus. This changes everything. It transforms the universe from a great impersonal mechanism into a great thought, a living, responsive entity. Meaning is not something we project onto the world. Meaning is an ordering principle intrinsic to the universe itself, as real as gravity. Synchronicity is proof that we are not passive observers of an objective reality, but active participants in a cosmic drama, where our inner states resonate and dialogue with the whole. It is the experience that heals us from the exile of modernity, reconnecting us with the soul of the world, the anima mundi. Our mind operates like a storytelling machine, and the story it loves to tell most is that of causality. This happened because of that. It is a linear, comforting, and for the most part, functional narrative. It allows us to build bridges, cure diseases, and send rockets to the moon. The problem arises when we try to apply this same linear logic to all aspects of existence, especially those that belong to the domain of the soul. Human experience is fundamentally non-linear, poetic, and symbolic. Trying to understand it with causality alone is like trying to measure the value of a poem with a ruler. Synchronicity invites us to step out of this tyranny of the causal why and into the realm of the meaningful what for. It presents us with events that are connected not by a chain of physical energy, going from point A to point B, but by a web of meaning. The link is not mechanical, it is symbolic. The world of classical, Newtonian physics is the world of cause and effect. One billiard ball hits another, and the second one moves, predictable, measurable. However, 20th century physics, with the arrival of quantum mechanics, began to reveal a much stranger universe, a place that more closely resembles the world of synchronicity. Concepts like quantum entanglement, where two particles, once connected, remain instantly linked no matter the distance separating them, challenge our notion of space. And causality, an action on one affects the other instantly, faster than the speed of light. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance. Jung and Pauli saw in this a striking parallel to synchronicity. Not that synchronicity is a quantum phenomenon, but that both point to a deeper layer of reality where our notions of separation, space, and linear time dissolve. When we experience a synchronistic event, we experience this spooky action on a macro, human level. The feeling is that the distance between our desire and the event in the world was zero, that the barrier between the self and the other has become porous. It is a glimpse of a holistic universe, where everything is interconnected in ways that linear logic cannot grasp. To embrace synchronicity, one must cultivate a new form of perception, a dual vision. One must continue to use causal logic to navigate the practical world, but at the same time, develop the sensitivity to perceive the patterns of meaning that unfold in parallel. It is learning to read the world not just as prose, but also as poetry. It is understanding that events are not just in a line, one causing the other, but can also be stacked, one signifying the other, echoing each other across layers of reality. Logic steps aside not because it is useless, but because it recognizes its own humility before a greater mystery. The most radical and transformative premise of synchronicity is that the line we draw between inside and outside is, to a large extent, an illusion. We live under the impression that our inner world, our thoughts, complexes, traumas, and joys is contained within our skull, while the external world is a separate, objective reality that simply happens to us. Jungian psychology turns this notion on its head. It posits that the unconscious is not contained within us. We are contained within it. And one of the primary functions of the unconscious is to make itself known. And it does so by projecting its contents onto the external world. The world, then, becomes a vast mirror of our inner condition. We do not see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. What is not conscious in us? What has not been integrated? What remains in the shadow does not disappear. Instead, it is projected outward and confronts us as fate. A man who is unaware of his own fragility and represses it as anima, the inner feminine archetype, will find himself inexplicably drawn to partners who embody that same vulnerability dramatically. Or he will find himself in situations where he is forced to confront his own powerlessness. The external event is not a punishment, it is a pedagogy of the soul. It is the self, the ordering center of the psyche, trying to show the ego a part of itself that it refuses to see. Synchronicity is the moment when this mirroring becomes undeniably clear, almost theatrical. It is when the projection is so precise and timely that it shatters our denial. Suppose you are struggling with repressed anger, a resentment you refuse to admit. You leave your house and, in a series of absurd events, encounter 3 situations of confrontation and aggression in less than an hour: a road rage incident, a hostile client, and a heated argument between strangers on the street. Chance, perhaps, but from the perspective of synchronicity, the world is simply mirroring the psychic energy you are emanating. It is staging your inner drama on the stage of reality so that you can, finally, become aware of it. Life becomes a continuous process of dialogue between the ego and the self, mediated by symbolic events. Every person we meet, every obstacle we face, is a messenger. The question to be asked is not why is this happening to me, but rather what is this reflecting about me? What part of me is being called into the light? To see the world as a mirror is at once frightening and immensely empowering. It is frightening because it takes away our alibi of victimhood. There is no one else to blame. But it is empowering because it means that the point of transformation is always within our reach. To change the world we experience, we do not need to manipulate the exterior. We need to do the inner work of self-knowledge and integration. By healing the inner wound, the reflection in the mirror of the world inevitably changes. To understand the language of synchronicity, one must understand the grammar of the soul. And that grammar is composed of archetypes. Archetypes, according to Jung, are the primordial and universal structures of the human psyche. They are patterns of psychic energy, inherited from our most remote ancestors, that manifest in our dreams, myths, religions, and crucially, in synchronistic events. They are like the dry riverbeds of the psyche. Personal experience is the water that flows through them, giving them life and form. Think of the hero, the great mother, the wise old man, the trickster, the shadow, the persona. These are not characters, but living powers within us and in the collective unconscious. Synchronicity often occurs when one of these archetypes is constellated, that is, activated with a great charge of energy in our lives, when an individual is at a crossroads, feeling the call to a new phase of life. The call to adventure of the hero archetype. It is extremely common for a synchronicity to occur that acts as a catalyst. He might find a book that describes the journey he longs to take, or meet a person who embodies the wise old man archetype, a mentor, who offers him the exact advice he needed to take the first step. The external event is the objective manifestation of the archetypal energy that was already in motion internally. The shadow, the archetype of everything we repress and deny in ourselves, is a frequent actor in the theater of synchronicity. When we try to maintain an image of perfection, the persona, the shadow manifests in the external world. We might, for example, be publicly humiliated in a way that exactly mirrors the flaw we try to hide. Or we find ourselves repeatedly betrayed by people who act out the dark impulses we do not admit in ourselves. The synchronistic event is a brutal but necessary invitation to integrate the shadow. Another powerful example is the archetypes of the anima, the inner feminine in a man and the animus, the inner masculine in a woman. When a man falls in love, he projects his anima onto the beloved woman, seeing in her the personification of his own soul. This can lead to encounters that seem predestined, full of magical coincidences that prove they were made for each other. Synchronicity here acts as the glue that binds the pair, serving the psyche's purpose of bringing the unconscious, the anima, into consciousness through the relationship. The beauty of archetypes is that they provide a pattern, a map. By recognizing which archetype is at play in a series of synchronicities, we gain a deep understanding of the stage of our psychological journey. Are we being initiated, tested, guided, or confronted? Synchronicity ceases to be an isolated event and becomes a path marker on our journey of individuation, the process of becoming the whole human being we are destined to be. Once the door of perception to synchronicity opens, a new challenge arises, that of discrimination. How to differentiate a genuine signal from random noise. How to avoid the trap of apophenia, the human tendency to see meaningful patterns in random data, or paranoia, where everything becomes a coded message. The answer does not lie in a rule book, but in the development of an inner sensitivity, a kind of symbolic literacy. The first and most important criterion for identifying an authentic synchronicity is its emotional impact. A truly synchronistic event is not just intellectually interesting, it is numinous. It provokes a sense of awe, wonder, a shiver down the spine, an inner certainty that transcends logic. It is what the historian of religion Rudolf Otto called the mysterium tremendum et fascinans, a mystery that both terrifies and fascinates us. If an event does not carry this emotional charge, this deep resonance, it is likely just noise. The second criterion is improbability and repetition. A single strange event can be dismissed, but when the same symbol, number, name, or theme appears repeatedly in a short period, coming from independent and unlikely sources, the universe is raising its voice. It is as if the psyche is saying, "Pay attention. This is important." Repetition serves to break down the ego's defenses and force the recognition of the pattern. A third guide is the context of your life. A synchronistic sign is always relevant to a question or psychological process that is active in you. At that moment, if you are in a deep career crisis, and the name of a profession you never considered starts appearing everywhere, that is a sign. If you have no active issue regarding your career, the same event may just be noise. The meaning is not in the event itself, but in the intersection between the event and your psychic state. To cultivate this reading ability, some practices are essential. Journaling is the most powerful tool. Writing down not only the strange external events, but also the dreams, feelings, and thoughts that accompany them, allows one to see the patterns of connection over time. Meditation or mindfulness practices quiet the rational mind and open space for intuition. Paying attention to dreams is crucial, as they speak the same symbolic language as synchronicity. Often, a dream prefigures or comments on a synchronistic event that will occur in the waking world. Above all, learning to read the language of the universe requires trust. Trust in your own subjective perception, in your intuition. Modern culture has taught us to distrust everything that cannot be objectively verified. Synchronicity invites us to honor our inner truth as a valid form of knowledge, to recognize that our soul has eyes that reason knows not of, even when a synchronistic event is so clear and powerful that it shakes our foundations. A force within us rushes to extinguish the fire of mystery. This force is the shadow of doubt, the inner skeptic that resides in the rational ego. Why this fierce resistance to an experience that is, in essence, full of meaning and beauty? The answer is complex and reveals much about the human condition. First, there is the fear of losing control. The ego is built on the illusion that it is in charge, that it is the master of its own house. Synchronicity shatters this illusion. It suggests that a greater intelligence is at play, a self or a cosmic order with its own plans and purposes. To accept synchronicity is to bow to this mystery, to admit that we are not the sole authors of our destiny. For an inflated ego, this is a bitter pill to swallow an unbearable humiliation. It is much safer and more comfortable for the ego to label the event as chance and move on, maintaining the fantasy of control. Second, synchronicity brings with it an enormous responsibility. If the events of our lives are not random, but messages full of meaning, then we are called to respond to them. If the universe shows us a pattern of self-sabotage, we can no longer afford to ignore it. If it points us in a new direction, we are compelled to consider it. It is much easier to live in a meaningless universe, for it demands nothing of us. A meaningful universe, however, demands our participation, our courage, our transformation. Doubt is a defense mechanism against this existential responsibility. The voice of inner skepticism is often the voice of our personal shadow. If a synchronicity points to an inconvenient truth about ourselves, a weakness, a fear, a trait we despise, the ego will mobilize all its defenses to invalidate the message. This is nonsense. You're imagining things. Don't be superstitious. This denial is not an act of intellectual clarity, but of psychological self-protection. It is an attempt to keep our idealized self-image intact, avoiding the painful work of integrating the shadow. Finally, we are conditioned by a culture that systematically devalues intuition, the symbolic, and the mysterious. Magical thinking is treated as childish or pathological. We are rewarded for being rational, objective, and pragmatic. We internalize this cultural voice, and it becomes our own internal censor. Ignoring the messages, therefore, is not just a personal choice, it is an act of social conformity. Overcoming the shadow of doubt does not mean abandoning critical thinking. On the contrary, it means applying it more broadly, questioning not only the mystery, but also our own resistance to it. It means asking, what in me is so afraid of this being true? The answer to that question often reveals more about us than the synchronistic event itself. Synchronicity is not a mere curious phenomenon to be collected and told at parties. It is a compass. It is an existential navigation tool, a bridge that connects us to a deeper reservoir of wisdom and helps us find meaning amidst the chaos of life. When we learn to recognize and dialogue with these meaningful events, they become reliable guides, especially in moments of transition, crisis, or stagnation. Imagine you are at a professional crossroads. You have a secure job, but it drains your soul. You long for a change, but you have no idea which path to follow. In this state of openness and uncertainty, the psyche is charged, and synchronicities tend to multiply. You might start noticing references to a specific area: gardening, for example, in unexpected places, a documentary on TV, an article in a forgotten magazine, at the doctor's office, a conversation overheard by chance. The rational mind dismisses this, but the soul pays attention. If you follow this clue, perhaps by visiting a botanical garden, you might meet an old friend who tells you about a landscaping course. The path is not revealed all at once, but through a series of synchronistic clues that guide you step by step. Synchronicity acts as a feedback system from the self. When we are on a path that is aligned with our deepest purpose, the process of individuation, we tend to experience positive and encouraging synchronicities, fortuitous encounters, opportunities that arise out of nowhere, a sense of flow and support from the universe. On the other hand, when we are stuck in a neurotic pattern, betraying our own soul out of fear or conformity, synchronicity often manifests in an obstructive way or as a warning sign. We might miss flights, encounter inexplicable obstacles, or have encounters that painfully mirror our stagnation. It is not the universe punishing us, but the self trying to redirect us, saying, "Wrong way. Turn back." In times of grief or loss, synchronicity can be an immense source of comfort and healing. Finding a white feather at the exact moment you think of a loved one who has passed, or hearing your song on the radio in a moment of deep despair, can be a profoundly healing experience. To logic, it is nothing. To the soul, it is the confirmation of a connection that transcends death, a reminder that love and meaning persist. Using synchronicity as a bridge to meaning requires a change in posture, from planner to explorer, from controller to listener. It requires the courage to ask open questions to the universe: what do I need to know now? And the patience to wait for the answer to arrive, not in words, but in the symbolic language of events. Life transforms from a problem to be solved into a mystery to be lived. The theory of synchronicity may seem abstract, but it is the stories, the concrete examples, that give it flesh, bone, and a power of conviction that defies reason. The most famous story is Jung's own. He was treating a patient whose excessive rationality prevented her from progressing. One day, she was describing a dream she had about a golden scarab. As she spoke, Jung heard a gentle tapping at the window. He opened it and caught an insect in the air as it flew in. It was a rose-chafer beetle, the closest analog to a golden scarab in that region. "Here's your scarab," Jung said, handing the beetle to the woman. The event shattered her rational shell and initiated her healing. Reason would say it was chance, but the meaning and perfect timing made it a transformative event. Consider the story of the French writer Émile Deschamps. In 1805, he was treated to a plum pudding by a certain Monsieur de Fontgibaud. 10 years later, he saw the same rare pudding in a Paris restaurant and wanted to order it, but the waiter said the last portion had already been ordered by Monsieur de Fontgibaud. Many years later, in 1832, Deschamps was at a dinner party when he saw the plum pudding again. He joked to his friends that all that was missing was for Monsieur de Fontgibaud to appear. At that exact moment, the now elderly Monsieur de Fontgibaud entered the room, having come to the wrong address. 3 improbable encounters with a man and a rare pudding over nearly 30 years. The statistical probability of such a sequence is astronomically low. Another powerful narrative is that of the identical twins separated at birth and raised by different families, unaware of each other. Jim Lewis and Jim Springer were reunited at age 39 and discovered a series of coincidences that defy any explanation. Both had married women named Linda, divorced, and remarried women named Betty. One named his son James Allen, the other James Allen. Both had a childhood dog named Toy. Both vacationed on the same beach in Florida, drove the same model of Chevrolet, smoked the same brand of cigarettes, and had the same hobby of woodworking. These are not mere coincidences. They are echoes of a shared identity manifesting in the objective world, as if an invisible script were being followed. And there are the more personal, perhaps more powerful, stories. The woman who dreams her childhood home is on fire, only to wake up to the news that the house, hundreds of miles away, had actually caught fire during the night. The man who, feeling an inexplicable impulse, decides to take a different route to work, thereby avoiding a fatal accident on his usual path. These stories touch us because they speak to a part of us that knows the world is more mysterious than it appears. They are beacons, illuminating the possibility that our lives are woven into a web of meaning far greater than our everyday logic can ever contain. We arrive, at last, at the heart of the mystery, at the most profound and dizzying implication of synchronicity. If the external world reflects our inner universe, if events arrange themselves into patterns of meaning around our psychic journey, then the inevitable conclusion is that we are not mere victims or passive spectators of reality. We are, in some fundamental way, participants in its creation. This is not the simplistic, ego-inflated idea that we can have whatever we want just by thinking positively. That is a caricature that misses all the depth. Jungian co-creation is a much more subtle, demanding, and sacred process. It is not born from the ego's desire, but from the union of the ego with the self. It is the result of the work of individuation. Individuation is the lifelong process of becoming psychologically indivisible, that is, a whole and integrated human being. This involves bringing the contents of the unconscious into the light of consciousness, integrating the shadow, dialoguing with the anima or animus, differentiating oneself from collective expectations, and finally, establishing a solid axis around the self, our ordering center. As a person progresses on this path, something remarkable happens. The distinction between personal will and destiny begins to dissolve. Life seems to flow with less resistance. Synchronicities become more frequent and more aligned with the soul's purpose, not the ego's whims. It is not that the person is controlling reality. It is that by aligning with their own center, the self, they also align with the ordering center of the cosmos, the unused mundus. Their individual will and the will of the universe begin to sing in the same key. They become a channel through which a larger cosmic pattern can manifest. To be a co-creator means taking final responsibility for the quality of our consciousness. It means understanding that our unresolved complexes, our ignored fears, and our unlived potentials are not just personal problems. They are forces that actively shape the reality we experience. The world we see is, in large part, the result of our level of consciousness. A world full of conflict reflects a humanity full of unintegrated shadows. Therefore, the most powerful act we can perform to change the world is not an external act, but the inner work of self-knowledge. This is the final call of synchronicity. It does not just invite us to see the magic in the world. It invites us to embody that magic, to recognize that the same intelligence that choreographs the movement of galaxies and the blooming of a flower is active within us, calling us to become who we truly are. By answering this call, we cease to be an object adrift in the river of time and become the river itself, flowing consciously toward the ocean of wholeness. Reality is not something we encounter. It is something we help to weave with every thought, every feeling, and most importantly, every step toward our own integrity.